So, welcome to this workshop, Drawing for IT Architects. My name is Filip Van Laenen. I work for Conf, and I hope you have some paper and pencils ready because we'll do a couple of exercises as we continue through the presentation. I work as a senior advisor for application development at Conf, but I've done lots of drawings as an IT architect over the years, so I'm not pretending that I'm the expert making super great drawings, but I know a few tricks and I would like to share them with you so that you can make better drawings as an IT architect too. Just to make sure that everybody gets the something out of this workshop, I'm going to give you the single thing that you have to remember and take home from this workshop. If you're going to remember only one thing from this workshop, the most important thing is to look at your drawings. So before you send a drawing to a customer or to colleagues or anybody else, have a look at them, not from a technical perspective. Are the boxes connected, the right boxes connected to the right boxes? But look at your drawings and ask yourself, does it look good? And if you start to do that, your drawings will become automatically better because you start to get an eye for how IT drawings should look like. And if they look better, they will also be easier to understand. So I was thinking we could start with a short exercise. I hope everybody is ready with paper and pencils, or a paper and a pencil. So you have 3 seconds to draw a rectangle. Okay, pencils down. I suppose the most of you have drawn something like this, or better, because I said you only had 3 seconds, you probably got a little bit of stress, so you probably just drew a rectangle, and it looks more like an egg. But if you think about it, 3 seconds is actually a lot of time. So 1, 2, 3, you have plenty of time to actually draw the rectangle the way it should be. And that's the same when you're making a presentation, even on a whiteboard, and you're trying to explain how a system is working and how the components look like. You actually have enough time to draw the rectangles so that they look good, and they're much more easier to understand how things are connected. Because otherwise, if you're just drawing those strange rectangle-looking thingies on a whiteboard, in the end, it's not so easy to understand how things are connected together. The same with even just writing names. You actually have the time while you're explaining to your audience what you're drawing on the whiteboard. You have enough time to actually write it properly instead of just scribbling something that's not readable. Unfortunately, we're not physically in a room, because otherwise I would have loved to just go in the room and see what you're drawing. But feel free to ask questions while I'm presenting, or give comments or ask for opinions about something you're just wondering. So please interrupt me as we're going, so that you can have a discussion somewhere. Now, if you look at this rectangle, this looks like the vanilla rectangle, I would say. But if you think about it, this is a rectangle too. But it's the vertical version. And there is something, that's this kind of thing you have to start thinking about. There is something about the default orientation of a rectangle is the same, it's like a horizontal one. But this is just as well a rectangle. And actually, this is a rectangle too. It's a square, but that's a rectangle too. But if I'm asking you to draw a rectangle, I suppose not many people will draw it like this. So there's something about drawing the rectangle in like the default way, which is more like this. This is a rectangle too. But you see that this is not a neutral rectangle. This is a rectangle trying to say something. It is very flat and it's occupying the space horizontally. So this is not just a rectangle, this is a rectangle with a message. So you have to be conscious about that when you're drawing and you're not following like the normal ratios, what we considered like the default type of rectangle. People will notice that there's something special about this rectangle, and that will either be correct because you're trying to give a message, to bring a message across with your drawing, or it will be disturbing. So it's important to be conscious about what kind of message the shapes in your drawing are sending out. Now, about the ratio in itself, you have the square, which is 1:1 from side to side, and then you have the golden ratio, and there are lots of studies about how that's sort of the most natural ratio for the two sides for a rectangle for people to draw and to look at. But the problem with the golden ratio is that it's not a rational number. So when you're drawing in many tools, drawing tools, you may run into problems. Usually, if you're drawing a box in IT drawing, and you're actually also putting some text into it, you will end up with something like 2 to 3 or 1 to 2, with two rectangles at the bottom. That's what I often would draw, even though the 1 to 2 rectangle, it looks a bit longer than what you would normally draw as a neutral rectangle. But that gives a bit more place for your text. So we're back to the solution, a rectangle. Now I'm going to give you a new exercise. And it's a stupid exercise, but this is something to start thinking about. What does it really mean? For example, to draw a line. If you not draw a line on your paper and just drawing it without thinking about this is a workshop about drawing IT diagrams, then I would expect that you drew something like this. Probably a horizontal line, which is like 1/3 of the size of your paper. But again, this is also a line. And this is also a line, but this is a line with a message because it's so long, it's stretching across all the page. And this is also a line, but it's very short. So there's also something special about this line. You feel instinctively that somebody wants to say something about this particular line. And it is also a line. But we people usually tend to draw something horizontal or vertical, or draw something and not diagonal, and certainly not like the orientation like this. We like order and symmetry and balance and things like that. And that's something that I'm going to discuss later in the session too. Now, if we go back to the rectangle, I'll show you like the default rectangle, but it's the same thing here, that if you rectangle, you can draw it a bit bigger. So this one is bigger, but it's taking up more space, and it feels like this rectangle is actually actively taking up space on the page. So there's also something about the ratio between the shape on the canvas and the canvas. Same with this one. This is also a solution to drawing a rectangle. But people will usually have drawn something like say 1/3 of the width and the height of the paper they're working on. So this is also a rectangle. There's something special when you look at this. This is a tiny rectangle. And this is a rectangle with an orientation. And if you're drawing in a software tool, you will actually need to put some effort in drawing a rectangle like that to have it oriented like this. So we're back to that. This is the solution for a rectangle, a neutral rectangle. Now, look at this, the difference between this rectangle and this one. This is also a rectangle, but now the stroke is different. It's a finer stroke. And this is something you often see when people draw a large rectangle, but stick to 1 pixel width for the stroke. And if you compare this rectangle to this one, you feel that there's something about the borders about very thin. Whereas on the other hand, if you make it this big, this is like a rectangle stating very strongly that here I am. So you have to think about the stroke width too in relation to the side of the rectangle. And what you would normally, what most people would consider is like the normal size of a rectangle compared to the size of to the width of the stroke are the 2 rectangles on the left, whereas the 2 on the right are either with a thin border or a very thick border. So again, when you draw rectangles on a drawing, on an architecture drawing or something like that, remember to also look at, for example, the width of the stroke so that the rectangle looks balanced or neutral and not trying to make disturb the viewer with a different stroke. So again, this is a solution, what I would perceive as a neutral rectangle with the size according to the canvas and the size, the two sides of the 2 sides in a more or less regular ratio, and also the stroke in accordance with the size of the rectangle. A new exercise. Draw 2 connected rectangles and just draw them so we can compare notes. So if I would be asked to just draw 2 connected rectangles, I would draw something like this. And I would probably draw them on top of each other. But this is also an alternative solution. If we were in a physical room, I could actually look and could show you paper and I could see how many people draw it like this, and we would do it in a different way. But this is also a solution, 2 connected rectangles. But if you're drawing using a software tool, I can promise you need some effort to actually get at this solution. This is also a solution, 2 rectangles connected to each other, but they don't have the same size. So there's something special about that rectangle at the top. So it's saying something. It's bigger, it's more important, or something else. So if you draw rectangles or any shapes, have them in the same size, unless you want to make a point about one of those particular shapes. This is also 2 rectangles connected to each other, but they're far away from each other. So this is something also trying to say. For example, these are 2 rectangles that have been living together after a year of Corona. They're connected, but they want to stay as far away from each other as possible. And this is the opposite. These are 2 rectangles very close to each other, and anybody viewing this drawing will say, okay, there's a message here about, are these 2 rectangles, are these components cooperating very closely to each other or about to be merged, something? There is a message in being positioned so close to each other. But if you're just drawing 2 rectangles connected to each other without a further particular message, then this is more or less the neutral solution, I would say. And then you can, again, make variations about the stroke width. So you see the one on the left is very thick stroke, trying to say something. It feels like it's saying something, but there's the one on the right, the 2 on the right, they feel like they're a bit shy. They're not a bit afraid to be on the paper. There's the 2 in the middle are what I would perceive as the normal. But the stroke width of the rectangles and the line connecting, they should normally be consistent. So unless you want to say something like, for example, in the first solution, that the connection is very weak, or in the second, that the connection is very strong, these drawings, you shouldn't do it like this. So you should go for something like this. This is two rectangles connected to each other and without saying a particular message. The question is, what's this? And this is three rectangles connected to each other. Maybe it's something like a user interface with some middleware or something, or an application server and a third component behind it. If I would say that this is the user interface, an application server, and a database, you would say, yeah, but I wouldn't draw it like that. So can I say that this is a user interface and an application server in the middle and a database at the bottom? I think most of you, unfortunately I can't see you, but I think most of you would say, no, that thing in the middle, that looks like the database. So there is something about the conventions about what shapes to use for what kinds of types of components. However, if I tell you the one in the middle is a queue and these are two components talking to each other, I would expect most people to say, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. So this is a user face at the top, application server in the middle, database at the bottom. This is how we usually draw it. But I've seen drawings where it's actually the other way up. Database at the top and application server in the middle and the user interface at the bottom. But for me, that feels a bit strange. I don't know. I sort of expect the database to be at the bottom. But what's this? There's a pentagon at the top. And I wouldn't have a clue what that means. So when you're drawing shapes on your diagram, follow the conventions and don't start to invent new shapes for special types of components, unless you're, of course, a big shot and an influencer and can actually start the convention that pentagons are the traditional, the new way to say, okay, this is a user interface. Don't do it. It will just confuse the people looking at the drawings. And this is basically the same drawing again, a user interface, an application server, and a database. I'm using the right symbols, but the orientation is a bit strange because now the application server is connected to the database from the side, and it feels like it's actually punching a hole in the database. So this looks strange too. And then you could say, okay, let's connect it like this. But this looks more like two components talking to each other and then connected to a queue out to the external world or something. So this doesn't feel like a database because it's a database fallen over. So again, there's something about following the conventions, and that includes orientation of your drawing, using the right shapes for the components that we understand, for which we have like a common understanding. This is a user interface, application server in the middle, and a database at the bottom. Now, this drawing is logically the same as this one. But there's something about the user interface. Why is it a bit to the left? So don't do that. Try to align the components in a straight line so that people don't feel like something is somebody pushed over the user interface, unless there's some message you want to bring with setting the user interface a bit to the left. And the same with this. Also make sure that the distances between the components is the same. So there's something about the user interface being a bit further away from the application server in this drawing, or is it closer to the database? Are you trying to say something? Maybe because the application server and the database live in the same project, whereas the user interface is, for example, in the browser. Then unless you're trying to send a message with placing them like this, this feels a bit wrong. And then again, the size of the shapes. So this is something like the user interface being more important or needs more development or something than the application server, because maybe the application server is just something serving static pages or something. So again, make sure that the shapes have more or less the same size, so that that doesn't disturb you unless you want to say something special. Also, make sure that the connectors are in the middle. They connect to the middle of the shapes. This feels like it's going to fall over or something. So that's another thing to watch for. And also make sure that your connectors connect to the borders of the shapes, not somewhere in the middle or a bit not entirely onto the shape. So again, make sure that the connections are connected to the shapes. And then there is this little detail. You see the connector to the database. Now it ends at the back of the database. So this doesn't feel right either. And this is not right either. Now it connects to the front of the database. Or is this actually a queue, not a database? Because then it makes sense, because then you have like a pipe and the communication goes through the pipe, then it makes sense again. If you're talking about the database, you want to connect the connector to the middle of the disk at the top of the cylinder. It's a little detail that makes the drawing look neutral. Yeah. Remember this? That was the two components talking to each other with the queue. Again, the connector here is like it would be for a database, but if you want to mark a queue, I would expect something like this. The messages are going through the pipe. So this is the solution. Let's make a slight variation on this one too. For example, like this. This is the same drawing, I just added some colors. But do the colors mean anything? No, I don't know. Unless, for example, saying that there is a blue team, light blue team, dark blue team, and a green team on your project developing in parallel, which would probably be a bad idea to do it like this. But unless there is something that explains what these colors mean, this doesn't really make sense. But you see something, sometimes drawings with shapes in different colors, just because the person didn't manage to get the colors the same across the shapes. That's disturbing. However, if I draw it like this, everybody, I think most people will see, okay, there's something wrong with the database. It's maybe broken or it's maybe down or something. People will notice if you use red like this, they're trying to say something. This is actually a color that follows a convention and gives you extra information. There's a little detail here. Make sure that the connector goes in front of the back database. This looks wrong. And actually, if the database is down, then probably the connection is down too. So maybe you should have the connector in red too. And actually, an even smaller detail, make sure that the connector goes to the back, just behind the stroke of the rectangle. So this feels better. This is like it's halfway in the connector. Doesn't look that good. Slightly better. Now, when you start to use colors, again, you have to follow the conventions. So this is not saying hot to me, even though it says it uses the word hot. Blue is the convention for cold. Therefore, this, the green box doesn't signal danger. And red is not something that can be ignored. It's actually drawing attention. So follow the conventions when you're using color. And in my experience, blue is sort of the neutral default color. It's also often a color that signals confidence and reliability. So a lot of, if you look at in many countries, like the ministries have like a blue logo and use a lot of blue on their website just to give the impression that they are very reliable as a government. Whereas green, that's often something new, something fresh, something like in greenfield, something new we're going to build. Red is something that draws attention, maybe danger or something that is an error, something. Whereas gray, that's something that can be ignored or is not so important. Maybe something that there's a future extension or something like that. Now, this is the default convention. Of course, if your company uses, for example, red as a default color, you probably have to follow that. But otherwise, I think this is like the sort of colors you can use to give messages. So if you look at this, it's a slightly more complicated drawing, but you can see here, there's something wrong with the database in the middle. The two components to the right are maybe two new components that we're going to add to the architecture, whereas the one on the left, that gray box on the left, that's probably something external or something that we're going to build in the future. But the dark blue boxes in the middle, those are like the default, the things that are the core of the solution. That's how I would interpret this drawing if it was shown to me. Now there is one big problem. Actually, there are many big problems with this drawing. But there is something about colors that we also have to think about. Once you start using colors to mark shapes or lines in your drawing, viewers won't be able to ignore those colors. But at the same time, not all your viewers will be able to see the colors you use in the same way as you see them. So use colors only to support your point, but not as a single thing to differentiate between two shapes. So a lot of people will have difficulties seeing the difference between the green and the red part of this drawing. And so that's one of the, so there's still room for improvement for this drawing. So, time for a little exercise. I'm going to look at something different. It's also usually in IT drawings. Draw a rectangle with the word text in it. And I would guess that a lot of people would draw it like this. The same rectangle from the beginning and just text in the middle of the rectangle. But again, there are lots of different ways to do this. In many cases, you will actually draw it like this. So you have a solid rectangle and then the text in white. This is the advantage that you don't have a stroke width to think about. Just fill up the rectangle and that's it. But there's something about the size of the text in the box, right? This is also text in a box. This is just a small text, so you have to almost look for the text in the box. This is also a solution, and actually it's not yelling that much as the first solution. So don't use all capitals in your drawings. And also consider the font that you're using. If you were going to present the drawing for a fancy new product or something to your board of directors, you're probably not going to use this font. Also, don't use fonts with serifs. That doesn't look good on drawings. So go for sans serif fonts. And also don't use italics because it breaks with the upright size of the rectangle. So you should probably go for something like this. The text has to be of the right size, if possible, a sans serif font. Yeah, something like this, somewhere in the middle. Or you could do it like this. So there's also something about the alignment of the text. So unless this is a box with, for example, an API to the right, and this is where the information is coming in. So if you're trying to signal something special with the text in the box, this is the wrong place, right, for the text. The same here. Should be somewhere in the middle and the right size. So if we go back to that last drawing, this is a possible solution. For example, a user interface with an application server, a database that is maybe broken. And then to the right, we're going to add some solution for the payments with the payments database. That's something we are going to develop later this year. And then in 5 years, we have to do some machine learning. That's in gray. So it's not important, but we want to signal, okay, we're thinking about it, but it's not there yet. The same drawing with this kind of text, with different fonts, italics, and also the wrong colors, doesn't look as good. Just look at the difference. This is informative. This is disturbing. And also look like in the database, the red database, the text should also be in red. That looks more neutral. Now, a new exercise. This is a bit longer one. I would like you to use a few seconds to draw the same drawing that I showed you, but use only one color. So don't use colors to signal what we talked about, like the two components to the right are new or special. The database is maybe broken or down, and machine learning is a future extension. So try to draw this using only one color. Okay, so I hope everybody got some time to think and draw. The way I would do it is something like this, using dashes and dots for the lines, and maybe mark the new parts in another way. So again, this is something you can use to vary and bring messages in your drawing. And so you can use solid lines, which is default, but you can also use dashes and dots. And the one at the bottom, dash and dot, people will often perceive this as something marking a border or something, like a secured zone or something. So this could be a solution. So dotted lines is more like the same as using gray. It takes away some of the attention, whereas the dashed lines maybe actually draw some attention. And you'll see to the right, the payments on the payments database is something special. There's something, it's like in a separate zone. But now we are also using colors to support the point, and not just using colors in itself as the only thing to bring a message. Now, up till now, I've made the drawings in Google Slides, which is the same as PowerPoint or other presentation tools. So you can actually make drawings in tools like that, that's quite okay if that's all you need. But if you look at this is done in my favorite tool to make the drawings, and it looks, I think at least, I think that it looks better. Now this is because if you use a special tool devised for making drawings, you have more control over how long the dashes should be and how many dots there should be and all that kind of stuff. So you have more control. And the tool that I'm usually using is Inkscape, which produces SVG, scalable vector graphics. And you're actually down to boxes like rectangles, squares, and lines, and things like that. So you're not getting the support of automatically rewiring connectors and that kind of things. You're actually down to the very basics of drawing in SVG, but it gives you the freedom to do a lot more things than what you would do in PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever. Inkscape is free, it's open source, so you can download it on your computer, on all operating systems. So that's the kind of drawings you can do in Inkscape, but I wouldn't be able to do that in Google Slides. And when you start to use a tool like it, you can actually add more details. Like, for example, this, if you look to the connector between the application server and the payments, you can actually make it, the color go from blue to green. So if you look at the first drawing, you see that the connector is green all the way up to the application server. But if you add a gradient, it feels more like, yeah, there is something for this connection that it's neither green, it's neither blue. You don't have to announce what's new here. So, but there can be a small detail that takes away some of the hard things in your drawings. Whereas on the other hand, for the database, for example, the connector should probably be read all the way up to the application server, because if your database is down, your connection is probably down too. That's again something you can consider when you're making a drawing. And you have two shapes in different colors. What the color of the connector between the shapes would be, and whether it should maybe be a gradient between the two colors. Now, a question, you can just think in your head what the answer would be. It's actually more like a rhetorical question. Who uses a red pen to take notes? Probably not so many people. Probably only those who ran out of blue pens. And yeah, there will probably be people using black pens. That's more usual. But green pens, that would be strange. You would actually have to go to a store and find the green pens, because it's not so easy to get hold of them. And a yellow or an orange pen, then you're really making a point. So think about colors and also use the conventions. That's also what I said. Blue is a default. Red is danger or something special. Use the convention. But if you're doing professional work for your company and you have a marketing department, ask for that palette so that you're actually using the same blue as the one for your company used in all PR material. If you're not working for a big company or you're not working for a customer with a big marketing department and they don't have a palette, pick the colors from their webpage. So you have a good start. They probably have a logo. You can just extract the colors from there. But if you have a marketing department, they will be very annoyed. They may be annoyed if you don't use the palette. If you don't have it, they haven't given it to you, and you ask for it, they will be very happy. They will be your friends. They will help you if you need help for brushing up your drawings too. If you're doing work for in your free time for an open source project or something like that, you can just create your own palette. You can do whatever you want. But if you want some tips, the basic rule for IT drawings is that you're probably going to need something blue. Could be a dark green or a purple color. And you're probably going to need another blue, green, or purple to vary. For example, a light blue and a dark blue, or a dark blue and a dark green, because you sometimes need to be able to make a difference between two shapes without drawing attention to one of the shapes. And then you're also going to need yellow, orange, or red to draw attention to, for example, an error or something that's dangerous or something. And then you also need gray or purple for peripheral things that you just want to say, okay, there may be external systems or future extensions or something that's going to be phased out. So you need something like that too. And if you want to look for a palette, this is a website where you can go and check, browse, for example, pick some colors from there. And I took this screenshot, I took it a year ago, and you actually see that the third one is actually a palette that is more like what I described before. There's a blue there, and there is a green there. There's an orange there for the things that draw attention, and there's a gray there. So somebody created a palette, and it could actually be used to make drawings and make colors consistent through drawings. Another thing you can do is take a picture or download the picture or favorite picture or something. And you can extract the dominant colors from the picture. And what the advantage with that is that usually in the picture, the dominant colors will have sort of the same shade. So they will actually feel like they have the same intensity. Like in this picture, the blue and the yellow and the green and red, they feel like they connect together. So that's also something you can do. And then you will probably need some tints and shades. So you can mix a color with white, gray, or black. And then you have a bigger palette where you can, for example, if you, for example, have to draw a box in a box, you can use a lighter blue on the darker blue. You can vary like this. But the basic colors are in the middle, and then you can make darker or lighter versions of it. That's a way to make a palette on your own. Now, a new exercise. Fill a rectangle with the pattern. Now, if I would be asked to do something like that, I would probably draw something like this, hatching 45 degrees from the top right to the bottom left. But this is also a solution. And this is also a solution. So you can actually hatch vertically or horizontally or in both directions. You can change the angle at which you draw the hatching. And you can put 2 or 3 hatchings on top of each other at different angles. And there is actually, you can actually vary the stroke width of the hatchings. But you see that the squares to the right are saying something else than the squares to the left. You can see that they are bringing a different message. Whereas the one in the middle, they're probably like they're hatched, but in a neutral way. Now, just in case you've been, you have an interest in heraldry, or if you've seen in old encyclopedies, you can actually use patterns as a convention for color. So that this is actually how heraldry used to be printed in old books. They can use the hatches, for example, for red. There was they use the vertical hatchings. Now, again, these patterns, when you use them in your drawings, people will start to put a meaning to them. For example, if you take the first shape, this feels like a component with an extension, right? And for the second one, the green and the yellow squares, there's some overlap, for example, common functionality or something. The one in the middle is more or less neutral, but the third one, the hatching, the way it's placed on top of the text, feels like this is maybe a component that is going to disappear or something. And then there is also the colors you have to think about. The one to the right, if you use yellow, and especially the combination yellow and red, you're marking danger. So again, think about what kind of message these colors when you use them in patterns, what they bring in. If you look just at the map like this, you will automatically, because of the conventions used on maps, understand what this is about. This is a river coming from a glacier with a lake and some marshlands in the middle, and there is a sandbank at the end. And you also see like there's probably a border there between two countries or something with a disputed zone because of the black hatching. People will, through conventions, understand this map, even though there's no text on this map. And people will also understand this is, for example, woods near the shore, and maybe desert, and then maybe something like a mountain where the glacier is. Yeah, so when you look at color combinations for the patterns, this is very powerful. So black and yellow, you think about the bee. Nature uses also color combinations to message things like stay away from me, I'm dangerous. And red and yellow is also a very powerful one. But there are also color combinations that are not so good. For example, this one. Some people maybe not even see this. For other people, it hurts their eyes. So combining red and green, especially if it's bright red and bright green, it's not a good idea. And this is also an unfortunate color combination, gray and green. So not all people will actually be able to see that there is a hatching or pick it up. But also, if you put color to your pattern, the color of the stroke of your shapes makes a difference. Just look at these two examples. If you use the brighter color as the stroke color for your shape, it feels a bit strange. I think that most people will say that the one to the left is like the default way to do it, and then the one to the right is trying to say something. Now, hatching is not the only pattern. We can use other, like this one, and dots and waves, ermine. So I wouldn't know why to use these patterns, and using this pattern too feels a bit strange. I wouldn't know what it means, but hatching is something that can be used in an IT drawing if used carefully to, for example, bring a message that some component is going to be extended with something else or has overlapping functionality or something. Okay, we're back to our old drawing. This is basically the same drawing, except that the user interface is suddenly to the right. There's something wrong. So you have to think about where you're putting your shapes. And it's not just about alignment, because the user interface is actually aligned with payments. It's just aligned with the wrong thing. And that makes it difficult to understand this drawing. It feels like the user interface is in front of the payment, and then there's that diagonal connector. That's disturbing. Now, if you look at this drawing, these are 9 rectangles connected to each other, but it's hard to read what the structure is between, so what the connection is, what the relationships are between these rectangles. Strangely enough, I often see UML diagrams formed this way because a lot of people think that their class diagrams have to fit on a piece of paper or on a computer screen, and that often disturbs the message, or it makes it actually difficult to read the class diagram or the UML diagram. This drawing is logically the same as this one. The rectangles are connected in exactly the same way, but they're ordered in a different way so that you understand, okay, these are 7 rectangles with 2 on the side. But the way you lay them out on your canvas will also give you a different message. For example, this is again the same drawing. The rectangles are connected in the same way, just a different message. And even this, just flipping it to the other side, it's not the same kind of structure you see with your eyes. So be conscious about how you're laying the shapes out on the drawing, especially if you're using the UML tool and you're trying to fit things inside a rectangle. Don't do that. So stop doing this when you're drawing class diagrams or whatever. But don't do this either. So what's wrong with this drawing? There's too many rectangles. And the way I look at this drawing, I feel that there's something at the top right, something going on there, and something going on at the bottom. There are 2 messages in this drawing. That's usually not a good idea. It's probably better to have 2 separate drawings telling you the 2 messages separately. And for me, when I look at this drawing, I think that there's probably a class hierarchy going on to the right, and something about a relationship between 5 classes, how they are connected to each other at the bottom. So it's probably should use 2 drawings to tell those 2 different messages. Okay, let's revisit this drawing. If I put the user interface a bit closer to the application server, you see this? This looks a bit too close. Yet, when you look at this, the space between the boxes is the same here. Yet, this looks a bit wrong. And it's like this. It's a bit too close. And that's important to know. I'm talking about lots of small rules that I have when I make drawings, but it's also important to know when you need to deviate from those rules. So this looks better if it is a little bit further away from the application server. So don't write down all the things that I've said and follow them literally. You have to use your head when you're making a drawing. And again, like I said at the beginning, look at the drawing. Does it look good? And if your user interface is too close to the application server, it feels awkward to have it that close, put it away. Take it a bit further away from the application server. The same thing with this. This is something you shouldn't do, but this is even worse. So this is like that you can actually, it's impossible to make sense. So align everything and make sure that there is a symmetry in your drawing. Make sure you have some equal spacing, that there is some balance, that it doesn't feel like the class diagram is falling over to one side. But also don't put in more than 7 items. But again, maybe 8 is okay, even 9. If you're having 10 boxes, probably too much. Also make sure that you bring only a single message in your drawing. It's better to make 2 drawings with to bring the two messages than one drawing with two messages trying to fight with each other for the viewer. Something to avoid: rounded corners. Regular corners look maybe a bit sharp, but rounded corners, in my experience, doesn't work well. Because if you're going to put two shapes close to each other, or one inside the other, that's not going to fit. So if you like rounded corners and you can use them, it still looks good in your drawing, be my guest. I stay away from rounded corners as much as possible. Another thing to avoid: shadows. It's a hassle to have them there, so unless your drawing tool does it automatically and does it well, stay away from it. Especially if it's not consistent, so this looks just weird. And finally, to connect everything, arrows. So what's this? I think people would say the middle component is talking to the two components, the one at the top and one at the bottom. But what is it really doing? Is it talking to those components, or is it acting on those two, or is it sending out information to those two? So next time you make a drawing with arrows, make sure to put in a legend saying, this is the control flow. So now you know that the one in the middle is interacting with the two on the side, and that may actually mean that the information flow is going in the other directions, because it's maybe sending out gets and getting information from the components. If you want to show the information flow, you can't read it from this drawing, but it could actually be the opposite way. These are arrows too, but just changing the type of arrow makes the drawing completely different. This is a class hierarchy. Most people in IT will say, yes, there's a superclass and a class in the middle and a subclass at the bottom. Two levels of class hierarchy. Or connector like this. So there is a superclass and a subclass, and then a component at the bottom. But also, you have to follow conventions, so don't make up things. But yeah, if you put like an arrow like this, a stroke on the connector, people will maybe understand that the connection is broken or something. But I'm not really sure what it really means. Maybe it means something like there's only a one-to-one connection or something. It's hard to say. So follow the conventions. And then there's, of course, the type of connectors. Straight lines. Are you going to use diagonal lines if components are not aligned vertically or horizontally? Or are you using elbow lines? Or the ones, the curves on the right? I make sure to connect to the center. That feels more natural than having them at the middle of the connector. And again, if you're using a tool like, for example, Google Slides, you probably maybe you won't have the choice to actually connect to the middle of the shape. And you have to connect to one of the connectors at the border of the shape. So again, a reason to use a proper drawing tool and not just a presentation tool. And then there are little details like the spacing between connectors close to each other, and the alignment. Also, if you have crossings, for example, make sure that people understand it's actually a crossing and not a connection. And if you're going to split a connection, put some symmetry into it and some balance. So that's it. This was the presentation. I have a book at Lindab. It's not finished. It's only started. I think I'll finish it one day when I'm retired or so. 20 years from now. But there are some more drawings there, and then you can at least get an idea of what I would write a book about if I had enough time to actually do it. So I wonder if there are any questions. If not, then I thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you soon again. I hope next year, physically in Bristol.
Hi, I'm track host. I'm Michael. Philip, we've got a question in the Q&A. I know that you are on a single screen, so you might not be seeing the Q&A box. I'll just read it out to you. It's from David Joy, and he's asking, do you prefer diagonal lines or lines that turn at right angles?
Yeah, I usually use the elbow line, so the one with the right angles, because if you use the diagonal lines, you will end up maybe they will have to start to cross other shapes that you're not connecting to. They're a bit further away from each other, and then there's some more going on. But also, if you use diagonal lines, the angle at which the angle of the lines will maybe vary from in your drawing, and that also is a bit disturbing. It puts usually more order in your drawing if you use the one with the straight corners, if you connect it like that.
Great. We've also got a question from Volker, who says, very nice talk. I find this topic is generally underrepresented and hard to find documentation for. Do you have any more book recommendations or links? I'd say perhaps we could put some links and stuff into the Discord track discussion on, the track discussion chat on Discord, or maybe discuss this in Remo. But if you've got any thoughts immediately, Philip, perhaps you could answer that now.
I don't have any other links, actually. So I think this would be a bestseller if I actually would write it, because I haven't seen anything like this.
If someone's put into the chat currently, the next version of Inkscape is getting some connector improvements. They've put a wiki link there in the chat for a wiki link to Inkscapes. I've also got a couple more questions. Which format do you use to store your drawings?
So when I use Inkscape, I store them as SVG, scalable vector graphics, but I usually also export them to PNG if I'm going to, say, put them up on the website. I know that in HTML5, SVG is supposed to be fine, but I don't rely on that, maybe because I'm just too old to believe in compatibility like that. But one problem with SVG is that not so many people use it. So you have the source file for yourself. I share it with other people, but yeah, that's a bit of a trouble. But that's the trouble with all tools. I also use a tool like Dia, which is just more like an architecture drawing tool with more support for shapes and particular shapes with all sorts of functionality. The best thing is to always save in the source format of the tool that you're using, like SVG for Inkscape and Dia for Dia. But you're probably, what I often do is that we use Conf as a wiki. I upload both the SVG and the PNG, and I hope that other people will be able to use the SVG files. So
Volker put in there, if you want your drawings as source with your code, plant UML is great.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, good.
Mako says, do you have any recommendation for a dedicated diagram drawing tool?
Yeah, so I use Ubuntu. So I'm using either Inkscape for, like, if I want to have full control. If I want to draw something quickly with some support, I use Dia. DIA, which is also an open source tool. I usually don't use UML tools. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not so much friends with UML, but I use the UML extension for DIA, so that's often good enough for me. So yeah, my favorite tool is actually Inkscape. But I have to warn, there is a huge learning curve with Inkscape, so it's fine to get started. But even after I've been using it for more than 10 years, and I'm still learning new things.